Welcome to this video about sentence fragments. We all know accidents happen in everyone's life and things get broken. An object slips through our fingers and shatters on the floor. Unless we can piece it back together, its usefulness is finished. A small piece of that broken item is sometimes called a fragment. Sentences can break too. A piece of a broken sentence is called a sentence fragment. Here are a few examples. Before he sat down to write. Not knowing where to begin, especially under heavy time pressure, and unable to concentrate for long. A 1,000-word essay due by midnight. None of these strings of words expresses a complete thought. None of these are true sentences. They're sentence fragments. Sentence fragments are common in conversation, but they're considered mistakes in academic writing. They create confusion in the reader's mind and interrupt the flow of thoughts. The good news is that when you know how to recognize them, sentence fragments are easy to correct. First, let's look at a table that compares complete sentences and sentence fragments so we can see how they differ. The table shows us that sentence fragments fail to meet the requirements for a sentence because they do not contain an independent clause and because they don't express a complete thought. This is why they are called fragments. The first type of sentence fragment we'll look at is the subordinate clause fragment. A subordinate clause does contain a subject and a verb, but it begins with a subordinate clause marker, so it cannot serve as a main clause. Some common subordinate clause markers are listed here. After, although, as. You can pause the video to read the list if you want. Click play when you're ready to go on. Here's a subordinate clause fragment. Because the monthly payments were over $300. We have a subject and a verb, but that subordinate clause marker tells us to look for an independent clause after the subject and verb. There is none. It's a fragment. We wonder what happened because of those monthly payments. There are two ways to correct this fragment. Solution number one works with subordinate adverb clauses. Remove the subordinate clause marker and you'll be left with a main clause. The monthly payments were over $300. It's now a proper sentence. Solution number two is to attach the subordinate clause fragment to a main clause. For example, Brian couldn't get the car he wanted is a main clause. Together, the two clauses make a reasonable sentence. Brian couldn't get the car he wanted because the monthly payments were over $300. You can reverse the order of the clauses if you're working with a subordinate adverb clause. But if you put a subordinate adverb clause first, be sure to separate it from the main clause by inserting a comma. Try this next one on your own. Unless Brian gets a higher paying job, is it a main clause or a subordinate clause fragment? If it is a subordinate clause fragment, how could you repair it? You can pause the video to give yourself time to think. When you're ready, click play again. It's a fragment. You've probably noticed the subordinate clause marker, unless. You can correct the fragment by removing the marker and creating an independent clause. Brian gets a higher paying job. Or you can attach it to a main clause. Something like this will work. Brian will have to continue riding his bike to work unless he gets a higher paying job. As in the previous example, you can reverse the order of the clauses if one of them is an adverb clause. If you do that, remember to insert a comma after the subordinate clause. Let's practice some more. Decide if the following strings of words are subordinate clause fragments or complete sentences. Whoever eats the last slice of pizza. even if it takes him 30 minutes to get there by bicycle. Although I've seen the movie before, I don't mind seeing it again with you. Because it makes her roommate angry. After giving yourself time to think, click play to see the answers. Which of these describes a reasonable solution for this fragment? Because it makes her roommate angry. A. It makes her roommate angry. B. Dirty dishes in the sink make her roommate angry. C. Because it makes her roommate angry, Angela never leaves dirty dishes in the sink. Or D. Angela never leaves dirty dishes in the sink because it makes her roommate angry. Give yourself time to think if you like. Are you ready for the answer? All 4 choices are possible solutions to the fragment problem. You've looked at subordinate clause fragments in isolated sentences. Now how about seeing if you can find them in a longer text? Give yourself time to read the following paragraph. Click play when you have found 1 or more subordinate clause fragments. Brian had loved cars since he was a kid. When his best friend showed up one day in a Subaru, Brian fell in love with the car. He made it his goal to find out as much as he could about his ideal vehicle and how to own one. He learned that Subarus are made by a Japanese company that formerly made aircraft engines. That accounts for the engine's superior power, although they rank very high in safety tests. That is not why Brian wanted one, because he was drawn to the turbocharged engine and the sporty aerodynamic styling. Brian was determined to join the community of loyal Subaru owners. If you found 3 subordinate clause fragments, you're right. I've highlighted them for you. Okay, it's time to wrap things up. To review, a sentence fragment is a piece of a sentence that does not express a complete thought. We looked at one type in this video, the subordinate clause fragment. Dropping the subordinate clause marker can sometimes repair this type of fragment. At other times, you'll need to attach the fragment to an independent clause. If you place a subordinate adverb clause first in a sentence, remember to insert a comma after it. Well, that's all we have time for now. Keep writing and watch out for subordinate clause fragments.